Chapter 35, Art for Art's Sake. It was Saturday, exactly 1 week before Dorian's mother was due to return. The boys woke up in each other's arms, basked in the winter sunlight streaming through the blinds. They didn't get out of bed straight away. They enjoyed the soft sheets that smelt like laundry detergent and hot passion. They hadn't actually had sex since their first time together, but they managed to fill in the gaps with other things. Some were quick, hot, frustrated bursts of energy wrapped up in desire and needy whines. Other times, it was slow, sensual, gentle and loving. They took care of each other whenever they got intimate, and both always finished feeling immensely satisfied, sexually and emotionally. They finally got up and begun making breakfast together. Corey overcooked the eggs, Dorian burnt the toast, and the sausages were left in the oven for way too long. They laughed as they tried to frantically fix their mistakes before the smoke detector was activated and their meal was completely ruined. Amongst the chaos, Dorian grabbed Corey by his collar and slammed their lips together, leaving breakfast as a forgotten memory. That morning, they had sex for the second time. It was rougher than the first, desperate and loud and done on the kitchen counter. They ended up having cereal. After showering and changing into some fresh clothes, an idea sparked in Corey's mind. Dorian? Yeah, babe? Can we go out today? Where? He asked in confusion. They'd both agreed to share a lazy day of lounging around the house in their pajamas. Not that he was complaining too much, whatever Corey wanted, he'd comply. He didn't care whether they stayed in or went out, as long as he could look into those pretty emerald eyes, none of that mattered. Get changed. I want you to meet someone. Dorian asked question after question the entire way there. Corey rolled his eyes and told him to be patient. He wasn't sure why he was being so secretive, but something about the entire situation just made him want to keep his mouth shut. Saying it out loud saddened him. He'd much rather just let Dorian see for himself where they were going. When they reached the graveyard, Dorian fell silent. His grip on Corey's gloved hand tightened and he let the other boy lead him through a maze of stone slabs reminding the world of a dead person's existence. The cemetery was quiet, its occupants living beneath the frozen ground and cold soil writhing with insects. The sound of a bird singing happily in a tree disturbed the peace, and yet, it somehow made it eerier. When they reached her plot, Corey took a seat in front of the gravestone, glancing up at Dorian through thick lashes, urging him to do the same. They sat side by side in a quiet moment in a silent cemetery, both drifting off into entirely different worlds but anchored down by their grip on each other. Their grip on reality. Do you think she would have liked me? Dorian whispered into the cold air, his breath foggy. Everyone likes you. Corey answered. Everyone but you. He reminded him. When we first met, you hated me. I didn't hate you. Corey said stubbornly, tearing up the scarce strands of grass that littered the ground near her tombstone. I just didn't put in the effort to like you. It was indifference. I think that's worse, Dorian said with a faint smile of amusement. I thought you were fake. Corey admitted. I didn't think it was possible for someone to be so happy. You made it look so easy. I figured something must be going on in your life that you didn't want people to know about. And you were right. He sighed. You're always right, Corey. I was wrong. He countered. Yeah, there was stuff going on with your mom, but you weren't hiding it by pretending to be happy. You were genuinely happy, despite your shit. There's a difference, I suppose. Dorian agreed dulcetly. I'm just glad you came round. Me too. The silence was too loud to ignore, so they allowed it to consume them. There was nothing more to say. Their love was the sweetest they'd ever known, but they hadn't known much. Despite feeling like they could conquer everything together, deep down, they both knew that it was unrealistic to imagine a future where they remained entranced by each other's existence. But that was okay. They didn't need a future when they had now. They'd given each other a beautiful story and an unlimited supply of beautiful memories. Here, in this graveyard, surrounded by dead souls who lived and loved and lost just like them, Corey and Dorian were happy. Despite all odds, the unlikely pair had crossed paths and built themselves a fairy tale in their own unique way. Perhaps it wasn't the conventional love story. There was no dramatic twist or racing through airports to declare their love for each other. It was gentle and full of heartache. They didn't hurt each other, the world hurt them. And through everything, they were there to mend the pieces of their broken hearts scattered on the ground. Maybe they'd accidentally picked up shards of each other's heart during the process, but that's what made their journey so utterly beautiful. Because that's what it was all about, beauty. That's what it had been about the entire time. Beauty exists for the sake of beauty. The world around us, filled with joy and pain and suffering. Distorted blurs of nature and images of anguish and misery. It was beautiful. All of it. Like Dorian had said at the ice cream parlor all those months ago, beauty isn't what makes people smile. And he was right. Beauty made them cry and scream and crave the pain of knowing the world wanted to hurt them. That's why they were so beautiful. And that's why they were so tragic, so broken. So, maybe they wouldn't last forever. Maybe they'd fade like a dying flower as the petals of their desire withered and fell. Like the flower on Corey's desk. The desk where he'd scribbled so many thoughts, where he'd escaped from his father and written out a million notes. Eat. That was another thing Dorian had fixed. It was as if the boy had come into his life and reorganized his entire world. He'd made it livable, bearable, and maybe the pain would never really stop, but Dorian had made it hurt just that little bit less. And maybe Corey didn't realize it, but he too had turned Dorian's world upside down. He'd opened his eyes to a world of literature and art and philosophical puzzles that kept him up at night. He'd been infected by the intelligence of a boy who knew too much for his own good. He'd been comforted and soothed and eased and loved by Corey. The sky darkened, but they made no move to leave. Inky streaks of pink clouds painted the fading sky, and the light trickled out of the day in front of their very eyes. Corey reached into his back pocket and retrieved a crumpled piece of paper, handing it to his boyfriend. "Here," he whispered. Dorian took it carefully. He was finally about to read the poem Corey had refused him access to for so long. And it didn't disappoint. As he scanned the pretty words, his dark eyes grew wider and wider, struck with a sense of urgent impulse to absorb every letter, every idea, every concept. It was beautiful. He understood everything. Aestheticism, art, the meaning of beauty. It embodied his deep-rooted feelings for the boy beside him. The boy he wanted to kiss and touch and love until he couldn't anymore. Once he'd finished, he read it again, but slowly. Then again. Then once more for good measure. He couldn't get enough. He was tempted to ask Corey to write another one, but different words fell from his lips. "Corey, this is amazing. It's beautiful." He blushed and smiled lightly. "You think so?" Dorian grinned and pressed his frozen lips against Corey's. That was his answer. That was all Corey needed to know, that Dorian was telling the truth. He was absolutely in love with the poem, as he was with the writer. "Has it got a name?" Corey shrugged. "I've got a vague idea." "Well? What are you going to call it?" "Art for art's sake." Ascent an ascent. There's something awfully tragic about a happy ending. At least Corey Winters and Dorian Price will be forever preserved in a story of beautiful nonsense. Because that's exactly what this book is, beautiful nonsense. I played with a very abstract concept I've never really explored before, and that's the notion of art for art's sake. Its basic values were briefly talked about in the story, but if it's still unclear, I'll try and give you a more meaningful explanation. The phrase became central to the British aesthetic movement of the 19th century, which is where Oscar Wilde comes into it all. His works almost always contained a lot of dandy characters, for example, Lord Henry Wotton in The Picture of Dorian Gray, and they essentially existed to challenge society with their radical views. Although they usually presented very scandalous ideas, at the heart of it, they spoke a load of bollocks. Their phrases and imagery and wording was always very beautiful, but meant absolutely nothing, not when one really evaluates their claims. Therefore, art for art's sake is merely a philosophical concept about how art ought, in all forms, literature, music, poetry, painting, etc., should be about aestheticism alone. There shouldn't be any deeper meanings involved, as art should be solely about art. And this story was about just that. It wasn't about a big plot twist or a pivotal moment that changes the course of the whole book. There was no scandal or misunderstanding that leads to the main characters splitting up, only to get back together 3 chapters later. Because none of that matters when you place beauty at the center of it all. I also wanted to focus on the notion of aestheticism being about so much more than just conventional beauty. The gritty seaside town, the decay of the old arcade left over as a relic from the 1980s, the ice cream parlor that's best years are far behind it, the very ambiguous sex scene, and the slightly awkward moment between Eugene and Lucky. Sorry, I meant Felix. Corey and Dorian are 2 beautiful characters with beautiful hearts and a beautiful story. That's what I wanted to emphasize. And in some way, their story mirrors that of The Picture of Dorian Gray. His portrait grows old while Dorian Gray stays forever young and beautiful. I'm not comparing myself to Oscar Wilde by no means, but by creating this story, Corey and Dorian will remain forever trapped in their youth, loving each other for eternity. And that's kind of beautiful to me. Now, I've rambled for long enough. I'd like to say thank you. This was a journey and a half for me. I've really felt my writing evolve along the way, and I hope to write more stuff like this in the future. I'm a philosophy nerd and live my life for the aesthetic, so if I can work those things into my stories in the future, like I've done with this one, then my books will become even more intimate and personal than they already are, which I hope is a good thing. So, thank you all so much for allowing me to invite you into my mind. I hope you liked this book, and if you didn't, let me know why. I'm all for constructive criticism as long as it's not too harsh. I'm human, believe it or not. So, all that's left to say is goodbye, and I hope to see you all again soon. I hope this book inspires you to look for the beauty within yourself, because trust me, it's there. Pix a inverted exclamation mark.